UFC diplomacy and we are what? We are looking into everything. I'm getting my stuff all set up and ready for tonight's live. Y'all just don't have an idea how excited I am to have this conversation. It's yet another night where we're gonna do what we're gonna learn out loud. So pretty much what happened is we have been looking into a lot of stuff this week, right? And I want to take the conversation a little bit further about the conversation of diplomacy, right? Today I came across a news clip from an international source, and what I found was a discussion from various, let's call them stakeholders from different, stakeholders, experts from different countries, and they have different backgrounds, right? And they're asking a very timely question, right? Because if you've been paying attention to any stuff that's been going on, you're aware that there's supposed to be some discussions that are happening, a memorandum of what understanding that's supposed to take place this Saturday. What, a couple days away, right? So the question I saw them asking was, did military pressure help get us closer to a negotiation or moving the negotiations along, right? So I got plenty of questions about that. I got plenty of questions. Um, But it's interesting, right? So we've been talking about learning what out loud, and since we've been doing these learning out loud sessions, I just wanted to take a portion of that discussion. I was actually able to screen record. It's about 15 minutes. I'm gonna allow us to go ahead and listen to it real time and examine it through the legally everywhere lens. Because if you guys been on the channel, y'all know we have a whole framework and idea of how we look at information. I wanted us to stress test. A stress test is the basics: what, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, right? I wanted us to stress test it, and then I wanted to put it through the legally everywhere framework. Pretty much it's just a model that I use on legal authority, right? Strategic actors, meditation lens, I shouldn't say meditation, mediation lens, power dynamics. We talk about impact to the individuals, right? So the impact absorption. We talk about historical patterns. Once again, that community impact. Sometimes we even are able to discuss economic elements. So rather than just talking about like who won or who lost, in this negotiation process, right? I'm very interested in the question that they asked, which was, did military pressure um actually push this negotiation forward, right? So I actually have that. I'm gonna play it in the background, right? So we're going to be listening to the clip, and I'm going to ask some questions. Hopefully you guys can stay here along with me. We're going to be looking for certain information. Here's what we're looking for. What was the original objective, right? What was the original objective when we walked into this war? Like, when we walked into this negotiation setup, better yet, let's move the war piece aside. When we walked into this negotiation, what was the actual objective, right? We were told initially, right, that it was supposed to be based off of the fact that they're not supposed to have a nuclear program, right? What I just heard today was that the memorandum of understanding, which is saying what we just have an understanding, is about opening the Strait of Hamas and essentially not having strikes, right? The way I interpret that is that puts us back at square one, right? Because that is, let's say, the benefactor, or let's say um, the impact of actually engaging in war, right? The fact that there are strikes being had or released, administered, conducted, right? The fact that the Strait of Hamas, those are all byproducts. That's the word I'm looking for. Byproducts of the fact that we were involved in this conflict, right? So if you're walking into a situation saying negotiations and it really brought you just back to where you were at square one, right? When we're trying to think of metrics of trying to understand how effective are certain actions, right? So what was the original objective? Is a question we're gonna ask, and I'm gonna play it in a second. What changed? Right? Like, if you're going to negotiations, the assumption is that something changed, hopefully for the positive, for the better, hopefully for both sides. The goal in the mediation is what? It's always to have a win-win situation. What remains unsolved, right? What things remain still unsolved? How do different experts define success? Now, that is the part I really want to discuss. I want them to discuss it, and then I want us to discuss it here in the chat, right? Because I do feel that if you walked into a situation and said, X is the reason we're walking into this situation, and then you present a memorandum of understanding or the idea, because the memorandum of understanding, what is supposed to be signed on Saturday, which means we don't even have that in order yet. But the memorandum of understanding is stating that they're addressing Y. We walked in about X. The memorandum of understanding is about Y. My question is, how can we measure success? Y'all know I'm always interested in those kind of questions, right? And then we have another question that I've just put on there. Y'all know how I am about impact to us as the individuals, the constituents. Like, who ultimately absorbs the consequences when negotiations succeed or fail? Like, who absorbs that, right? So keep in mind, it's not legal advice. It's just educational discussion, civic engagement for the most part, critical thinking, and just like understanding how decisions and like negotiations, um, how decisions in those kind of rooms impact the community, impact the individual. So once again, it's just one of them learn out loud situations. Is happening real time. So I want to discuss it real time. I want this thing timestamped tonight. Okay. Um, so once again, well, I had some notes, and I said I was gonna look at and make sure I'm saying all that we were supposed to be discussing. The lens of this particular clip that I pulled, this is international news, right? Let's see. It has about 4 experts I have on this 15-minute clip. We're gonna listen to it. They do address a lot of things that come out that legally everywhere framework. But I'm just curious, like, what you guys are gonna think, right? Some were looking at military outcomes, some were looking at diplomatic outcomes, some were looking at regional relationships. I thought it was really interesting when we talked about relationships, right? Um, Cardi B had a song that said when y'all ops linking up, right? Literally, you're watching situations where countries and nations who have never been cool are becoming cool because there's so much tension going on. People are trying to link up. You've had some people linking up who have not been cool since the dynasties were in effect, right? So, it's interesting discussion with regards to like relationships, right? Also, when we're talking about a memorandum of agreement versus a memorandum of understanding, I just want to say with the understanding, I'm gonna give you a quick analogy. Um, I use a social one. So when I was younger, there was something called the Kings of Comedy, right? It came out like in the early 2000s. D.L. Hughley had this bit where he said, he was talking about bill collectors calling. And he basically said the whole punch of it was, he says, you can expect me to pay whenever you like, right? Because they pretty much told him, we expect you to pay your bill on, let's say, the 30th, right? He said, you can expect it whenever you want. They didn't come to an agreement, right? This was just an understanding that they had. They understood on both ends that it should be paid, right? They didn't necessarily agree on when it was going to be paid, right? And in this particular situation, once again, keep in mind, they have discussed that they will have a memorandum of understanding, but there's no writing yet, right? They have to have that be handled in, I believe it's supposed to be Europe, somewhere in Europe, Saturday ish, right? Right now, based off where I am Eastern Standard Time, this is roughly around like 10:30ish, well 10:43 Eastern Standard Time, so 10:43 p.m. right on a Thursday. So once again, what was the objective? What evidence supports the claim? What assumptions are being made? Who benefits? Who absorbs the consequences? What will happen if the parties never reach a full agreement, right? What happens if they never reach an agreement? Because once again, they're supposed to have been in discussions for quite some time. It's supposed to be a ceasefire since April. Yet we have seen that there have been strikes, right? So what happens? This discussion was about the military pressure, right? These military tactics help move negotiations along? Because now we're talking about a memorandum of understanding, or is it something else? Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that in the background, and we're gonna listen to it. Because once again, put this right here while y'all listen. Okay.
Will open the Strait of Hormuz. It will be a down payment on further negotiations. Recording on 40611 163 Alan, look, you heard the president there in this Oval Office press gaggle say that the Iranians have agreed. He believes that the Supreme Leader has also agreed that Iran will not have he did not say Iran has agreed not to have a domestic nuclear program. He did not say that the Iranians have agreed
I'm
to
gonna
turn over
rewind that just because my screen.
down payment on further negotiations, but we're nowhere near hitting the details or the hard parts, which will have to be coming. Alan, look, you heard the president there in this Oval Office press gaggle say that the Iranians have agreed. He believes that the Supreme Leader has also agreed that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, but he did not say that Iran has agreed not to have a domestic nuclear program. He did not say that the Iranians have agreed to turn over the nuclear material that is buried underground right now. Do you think that Iran would agree to those two conditions that the United States has talked a lot about? Even before the 2015 DCQA agreement, Iranians have always declared that they don't want to make the bomb. The international organizations investigating Iranian nuclear program have approved several times since 2015 that Iran is not seeking a nuclear bomb. Actually, several times we had intelligence reports from Washington that Iran is not seeking a nuclear bomb. And up to that, in the last summer, before the 12 Days War, there was an agreement achievable and at hand, which could somehow guarantee that Iran is not making the bomb and it won't be able to make. The United States and Israel decided to invade Iran. And even a day before these 40 days war, almost 100 days ago, there was also another agreement achievable in Geneva, according to Arab and European governments, which could also guarantee that Iran won't make the bomb. But it was United States and Israel again, while in negotiating with Iran, invaded Iran, and they have failed to achieve their goals. Their goal was to the regime change. The goal was the complete surrender, absolutely a kind of defeating Iranian military capabilities. None of these have been achieved. Therefore, what's going on now is that the failure of the so-called coercive diplomacy that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu has actually have decided to pursue, and therefore. Now, President Trump is actually cannot continue with the war, cannot also make the deal. Actually, this deal, if this signed the way that we hear it, it would be an absolute failure for President Trump for entering a war without any strategy, without any kind of goals to achieve, and add up to that. Iran was able to close the Strait of Hormuz, to damage the international economy in one way or another, and also to maintain the control of the Strait of Hormuz. The United States failed politically to establish an allies to join him, to join President Trump in this war. Even in their very closest allies, like European, actually have actually decided not to without the United States, and that is a big, big failure. United States failed thoroughly because they could not achieve their goals through the military means. Also, they are diplomatically now defeated because it's Iran that it imposes its own conditions on United States and not the other way around. Therefore, what is happening it's actually a new era when we see the decline of United States power and probably the post-United States Middle East, where and when the regional actors are becoming more active and more in control of their own security, political, and economic kind of destiny. Okay.
Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javid is here with us as well. You've been listening to all of this. I just want to, if you can, just walk us through the global reaction to all of this, because President Trump, when he was there in the Oval Office, he listed off all of the countries that he's been on the phone with, including the Qataris. I mean, it's quite a long list. What is the global reaction to this going to be? Well, I think we just have to take a step back and remind our viewers of who else has been involved in all of this. The United States decided to go to war in February. There's been a ceasefire since April. Then there was an incident that the Iranians said they did not carry out. It was the downing of the Apache. The United States decided to escalate things. Then the US president said he's going to escalate again and again. So tonight was going to be the attacks, according to the US president, that would tell the Iranians the might of the US military, which had not happened. And now he says that there's going to be a deal. That deal, according to him, is going to be signed over the weekend. That deal will involve, rather than him traveling, his vice president, J.D. Vance, who traveled to Islamabad previously for a similar sort of agreement or deal. And it is going to be taking place in Europe. So it will not be in the Middle East. It will not be in Pakistan. It will somewhere in Europe, and there's multiple avenues there. So in terms of international backing or two peace efforts, you've got a quad that was formed in Saudi Arabia, where you've got the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Turks, and the Pakistanis spearheading that effort. And then you had a parallel track being led by the Qataris, going back and forth between these two sides. Again, they were parallel, but they were in close coordination, are still in close coordination. And in the lead up to this announcement, there have been multiple diplomats, Iranian diplomats and Americans in Doha speaking to the Qataris. Then there was a Qatari delegation which went to Tehran, and finally you've got the semblance of a deal. So you've right after this announcement, before this press gaggle, the U.S. president made a contact with the Qatari emir, and they discussed the understanding and how this is going to take shape or form. Important here to highlight the three most important things that the Qataris and the Americans and the Iranians have been dealing with is a relief on the Strait of Hormuz, some sort of lifting of sanctions on Iran, and an agreement in principle on the Iranian nuclear weapon. That's where we are right now. This is being watched very closely by the region and the world because it has major implications for about a fifth of the world's oil and gas, but also it has had global repercussions to the economy. So there's going to be a global reaction to this, and by and large, as you've seen from the Qatari statement, a welcoming of anything that ratchets things down and gets these sides on the table and come to an agreement where oil starts flowing freely, and the energy crisis that the world is slowly walking towards is prevented. General Kimmett, look, hanging over all of this is the fact that there is another participant in this war, and that is Israel. And there was some reporting in U.S. media that the American president, Donald Trump, had suggested to his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, that if Israel did in fact want to go into full-scale war, that it may in fact be on its own. Do you think that ultimately is going to be the thing that the threat of Israel being on its own that's going to get Israel to agree to this? Or do you think that Israel's not going to like this deal, whatever it is?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the comments of your analyst on set. The IRGC spokesman that you had on there before was not helpful with the conversation. All he did was recite talking points. And frankly, if that's the kind of attitude, if he reflects the attitude at Tehran, I would suspect it will be back at war. in no time at all. But the Iranians don't care because anybody that protests will just gun them down in the streets. Now, I think my colleague on set brought up some very important points. I would add to that, over the next 60 days, we will continue to negotiate with Iran on some of the critical issues. More critical.
What will go along with this? Respectfully, General.
And I'm getting there. I think over the next 60 days, the critical issues will be hammered out. Inspection, verification, the removal of the Iranian capacity to not only have centrifuges for civilian use, but also the clear use of those centrifuges for the highly enriched uranium that makes the nuclear weapons. And I believe that's the framework that Israel will be looking at. But we've got to understand that Israel's objectives and the American objectives are overlapping, but they're not identical. And candidly, I see the Israelis as a force to be reckoned with on the part of Israel if they try to play the kind of games your first speaker said. They will enforce the mechanisms because the fact remains an Iranian nuclear weapon and ballistic missiles are a direct threat to the existence of Israel. So I think the United States will keep Israel under wraps and under control as long as the negotiations go well on these critical issues of inspection, verification, removal or dilution of the uranium, and in terms of how much money we will give back to the Iranians at what time. And candidly, if the Israelis believe that this deal is going southward and too easy on the Iranians, reflecting the view of our colleague from Tehran, I think they will take unilateral action. And as a matter of fact, I think the United States will take action as well if the Iranians do their typical deceive, deny, delay, especially on the issue of inspection and verification.
All right, interesting point. General Mark Kimmett, Alam Saleh, Osama bin Javed, we appreciate you all being here. All right, joining us now from London is Yossi Meckelberg. He is a specialist in Israeli politics and a senior consulting fellow with the
It would be happy with the terms of the deal. It's not very likely, but if not, they might criticize this. Probably Netanyahu will do it relatively gently because he knows what might be the response from Washington. But the question how they play along with it in the longer term.
Do you think that the suggestion that's been made in U.S. media that the U.S. president had told the Israeli prime minister that if they want to go to war with Iran, they want to escalate in response to Iranian missiles into Israel, that they may well be on their own? Do you think that that suggestion was effective? I mean, is that enough to scare the Israelis into submission?
I think especially after the last 2.5 years, even more so after the last 4 months, the room for Israel to go alone in such a war is very limited. The war is costly. It really requires to restock the arsenal from air defense to other equipment, to ability to attack in Iran. It's still there. Too many fronts are open for Israel. It's Lebanon, it's Gaza, even in the West Bank, the Houthis. The idea that Israel can, here and there, yes, it can continue going on its own, but beyond a few weeks, this is unrealistic. It needs the United States, and it's different from Biden. If when he says what you suggest that he said is as good as saying just don't do it.
All right, Yossi Meckelberg from Chatham House joining us there from London. We appreciate your input today, sir. Thank you. All right, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Dan Grazier. He is a senior fellow and director of the National Security Reform Program at the Stimson Center. Thank you so much for being here, sir. I wonder, to what extent did U.S. military strikes that we've seen over the past couple of days ultimately get Iran to agree to this deal, assuming that they have indeed agreed to this deal? Or do you think that those military actions were totally irrelevant to this deal getting done?
I generally think that the military strikes definitely got the attention of the Iranian leadership. But the fact that they have dragged their feet in coming to even this agreement that apparently was hashed out today, I think that had more to do with the diplomatic efforts than it did any kind of than the coercion of the airstrikes played in it.
Do you think that Israel is going to go along with whatever this final deal is? And do you think that the United States has the power to tell them that they have to go along with this?
I'm not entirely sure. Israel might go along with it, but Israel is a sovereign country, and so the leaders of Israel are going to ultimately have to decide what's in their own national interest. Certainly, the United States has some points of leverage, but as I think all of us have really come to discover over the last couple of years, that leverage isn't absolute. So it's difficult to say. I'll be interested to see how these events unfold, just like the rest of the world.
Do you think that if U.S., I mean, it seems like we have a deal. All the signs are that a deal is pending at the.
Okay, and that's where the clip ends, just kind of cut off when it was recording. Okay, so what are y'all thoughts on that, right? Let's go back to what some of those original questions were that we said we would kind of assess, right? Did we get some of that information as far as the stress test goes? Did we get some of that? I took some notes on some key areas that they addressed. The concern of kind of walking in with no strategy, right? When we're going into negotiations, realistically, ideally, you would want to kind of walk in with some very specific goals and a strategy and kind of going about that, right? For the most part, it doesn't look like they kind of walked in with a strategy. We know they walked in with a goal. We were told that it was X, right? But then we hear that in this potential memorandum of understanding, they're kind of more so talking about Y. Makes it a little difficult when we're trying to understand metrics of success, like how successful is this, right? So what was the objective? The objective was supposed to be, as we were told initially, right? The objective was to eliminate a nuclear program. Right now, we don't hear that the memorandum of understanding, this understanding that we are to believe is occurring, right? It's not officially signed until this weekend or Saturday, from what I hear on some sources in Europe. So really, we don't even officially have that, right? But we were told that the objective was a nuclear program. That doesn't appear to be what the memorandum of understanding about. The memorandum of understanding is making sure the Strait of Hormuz is what open, accessible for people to move those exports, right? We know so many exports actually flow through that place. So to be locking that up is affecting not just one economy, but numerous economies, which means they're affecting people's money, you're affecting people's day-to-day experiences, right? Because those exports, people are waiting for it, whether you are a small business owner and you're trying to get your supplies, or you're the consumer saying, hey, I went to the store, where is my stuff? Why does stuff cost so much, right? Whether you're talking about gas, right? Right, gasoline for your car to fuel things. Um, it, it's an impact, right? Whether we kind of look at like, oh, it's just this thing that they're dealing with. No, we as individuals, we absorb a lot of that impact too, and it does affect our day to day. So, kind of question, what was the objective? Helps us measure if we feel like it was actually being addressed, right? What evidence supports like the claim that they're saying, oh, we've come to an agreement? Well, what's supporting that? Do we feel like we have that information, right? People are talking about agreements, some people saying, oh, we are to believe it's supposed to happen this weekend, which means technically, if it's a Thursday, it's not effective. If it's not effective, do we really want to claim that per se? Right? It all depends on your metrics of success, right? All depends on how you want to look at it. I believe any movements we can make towards a resolution, anything that we can do to mitigate further risk and harm to people's economies and people's lives, where, when you have war, you inadvertently have what people's lights being turned out, deletion, right? You have that. You have a loss of life, loss of standards of living, right? Loss of normalcy. maybe even loss in let's say like your emotional well-being, right? Access to healthcare can be modified, right? Because more people are in harm, so less access to the medical professionals who are trained in those areas, right? There's certainly a harm absorption for the everyday person. And that's just one specific lens of the legally everywhere framework, right? So, another question we had was like, what assumptions are being made? Y'all can get in the chat. Let's talk about it. What kind of assumptions are being made here? Because I put in another live we did earlier this week. Show me the MOU, right? Technically speaking, they said they would sign it this weekend, which means we don't have nothing even signed for that. It's kind of like you having a conversation with somebody, right? They're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. But you don't got no text messages. You don't got an email. Obviously, the MOU would be considered a more higher standard. It's actually considered to be, more legal based, right? But just for the sake of like a good analogy, it's kind of like you like, where's the proof of that? What supports the fact that we had this conversation? What can I kind of hold you to? And even then, it's just an understanding. It's just saying that we have come to an understanding. Like I said with the D.L. Hughley analogy, right? The King of Comedy tour, if you ever want to go look at to get the whole gist of that particular joke that he put out, right? The bill collector called, I'm expecting that on the 30th. He says you can expect it whenever you want. Like, do they have an understanding that the bill should be paid? Yeah, they have an understanding. Did he say he was going to pay it on the 30th? Apparently, that man said he can expect it when he wants. So that means they were not in agreement about that particular term, right? So we have no memorandum of agreement, right? That's not an exact definition, so don't hold me to that. I just wanted to give you a visual for someone who may not kind of get it, right? As long as you're in the ballpark, we all good. Yeah, we good, right? So a lot of assumptions being made, right? What kind of evidence do we have to support the claim that this actually happened? I mean, we see that they're saying, if you're getting something from the president online saying that in fact this understanding has been had, right? That's supposed to be a reliable source. We see a lot of news stations reporting out and talking about it, right? So it seems like these are reliable sources. But they're also within that same discussion with various experts, various stakeholders at various levels, right? We had a past commander on there. We had a member from the IRAGC. Once again, these are high level stakes people, right? We had an expert relevant to like Iran history or whatever that was present, one of the last speakers that we had. And I will try to put this original clip up. I was having difficulty with uploading it on the YouTube. So I said I'm just gonna do the live and then we'll just add it later. But I want you guys to hear the content, right? We had two actual US representatives, right? That actually kind of said different things to different lenses, right? Because we're getting a full conversation, a full perspective, right? My question is, who benefits from it? Well, my perspective is if we can preserve life, if we can limit the harm to the economy, the absorption of the impact that the constituents, right, their constituency, our constituency, the general economies across the globe who have had to well, I won't say bite the bullet, but like for those who have had to absorb the harm from not having access to the Strait of Hamas, right? For those who were impacted by the fact that there were strikes being deployed, for the harm that people have had to absorb and take in as a byproduct of that. For those who are like, hey, I have not had access to certain kind of products that maybe have been stuck somewhere that they would have need access to. For all those people, like that opening, it would be an improvement, right? But when you think about benefits, when you say, hey, you started with an objective of saying you want to control or yet eliminate nuclear said program, you don't want to have certain access to certain levels of uranium and things like that. I know that there's something, if you go look at the UN and how they have a certain level they can have, but there's a certain amount they should not have according to that document. And you're saying you don't want them to have anything, right? Okay, or a certain level of a program, let's say. And memorandum of understanding doesn't address that. You walked in talking about X. Right now, you're saying y'all addressing Y. Metric wise, when we're trying to measure success, how successful is that? Who does it benefit? Well, we will see as this builds out, right? Because they do need to add more to the overall body of what this agreement is going to be, right? So essentially at this point, we looking for them to add some meat to them bones, right? That's how the elders say, put meat to them bones, right? We looking for more. So hopefully they're going to be building that out. But at present moment, it doesn't kind of make sense, right? Because you said you was going in for X. Now you talking about Y. Who absorbs the consequences? That's what we've been talking about. Constituents. We the ones that absorb that consequence. We the ones going to check out, like, why does that cost that much? Going to the gas station, they changed some of the that's a whole nother live, okay? That's a whole nother live. But they changed certain elements of like the structural setup of like gas. When you're going to the gas station, like they've changed certain levels of like what could be present or how much has to be present because of the limited access that they have to certain things. So once again, who's absorbing that impact? We are, because my understanding that change would mean that you got to get gas more frequently because it's not, your car is not gonna go as far because it's burning quickly or burning quicker. So the alcohol, I believe, content that's in the gasoline is like supposedly higher, right? Which means it's burning off quicker. I'll do another live if y'all want info about that one. I've been watching a couple different studies that different chemists and people were conducting. It's a lot going on with that too. Once again, I told you that's a whole nother live, right? But talking about harm absorption, you think you getting some gasoline, you're like, oh, we should be able to last this much. You're trying to budget out your life, with maybe restrictions to like your access to certain things, right? You're thinking you can plan your life out accordingly. You're like, oh, well, I know I can get to work because if I put X amount of gas in my car, it's gonna take me X distance, right? Or miles or minutes, wherever you from. Where I'm from in Michigan, we typically talk in minutes. It's X minutes away, but I know most places they just outright say the miles, right? Whatever the distance, X the distance, right? But then you come to find out the quality is the quality because they out here cutting the product. They out here cutting the product. That's gonna be a harm that you as the individual, you as the consumer, right? You're absorbing that. You as the constituent, you're absorbing that. You the one taking that on. Just to give you an example, right? I'm sure there's a myriad of examples that we could come up with, but just the ones I feel like people typically talk about, right? Like the gasoline, the food. You going in saying, hey, how much does a bag of rice cost? Right? A grain of rice. How much does it cost? And now it costs more because what the inventory, when the stores are ordering, they better yet, another example, right? Your store. You're ordering things to fill up your store, right? So that you can make sales. And you put an order out. You put an order out. You've paid your vendor, wherever they are in the world, right? You paid your vendor for your products. Let's say you have a food store. And so you sell rice and grains and things of that nature. You've made the purchase, which means it's already come out of your budget. It's sitting on a boat somewhere. You don't have access to it. You know who also doesn't have access to it? Your clients. You still pay for it, but you don't got the product. Your customers are unsatisfied because you can't deliver. There's a demand, limited supply. And guess what? You still had to pay for it. So it's just sitting out there waiting. Meanwhile, your customers are a little flustered with you because you're not delivering to them the way that they need it. And right now they're like, the other stores don't got it either. I was looking for you to supply. You usually my plug. That's what you do. But you can't do it. Why? Because the things that you might need, this export that's coming from somewhere else, you can't access it. You as the consumer, right? You're absorbing those hits. Us as constituents, we're absorbing those hits. That's why I always talk about the harm absorption, right? A lot of times we don't think about how we as the individual keep taking those hits, because when we're not in those rooms to negotiate, impact, right? When they shifting these liabilities, a lot of times they shift it and shift it away. It's not on their side, not on their side. So whose side is on? Who gonna take them hits? We taking those hits. So my question becomes, what happens in that case if they don't come to an agreement? Based off current things we have been seeing in the news, what potentially could be outcomes if they don't come to a resolution, if they can't find a win-win, if they can't find something agreeable? What might be the outcome? We've already seen what their conflict to a degree looks like for a few months, right? We've heard a lot about potentials for escalation. They use the exact language in this particular, I guess, the case study for using a stress test, right? They use words like escalation, which were pretty much what military strikes or military action, right? Another form of escalation could be, we heard what the word we all talked about often on this channel, sanction. What that's more of an economic chokehold. That's what that is. That's an economic chokehold. Somebody put sanctions on you. They get to trying to choke out certain things you can do in other spaces. You're trying to get plugs and connections to other people, and you got a sanction. It's like a financial. Just put it this way. It's like a chokehold. Like put you in a headlock, right? Not comfortable. Like back in the day, another analogy, right? Very millennial based. It's like somebody kind of putting you in one of them Kurt Angle locks, and then they say, "I'm gonna make you tap out," right? The whole point putting you in a Kurt Angle lock, right, is to make you tap out. You can't handle it, right? A sanction. They put you in a situation where they're trying to force you to tap out till you bend to their will. So the question becomes, to the original question, did you feel like the military actions help move us closer to mediation? Or my question be further away? I guess we'll see. Only time tells, right? Only time really tells us. But it's certainly interesting information, right? It's certainly interesting information um to think about, because what happens? We have to absorb those hits. So it's important for us to ask the question, what happens? And then how can we be proactive in trying to figure out how we want to cope, adjust, and adapt to all of that? What kind of protective factors can we put in place for ourselves to mitigate certain kinds of risks that we experience as what the individuals, the constituents, because we're the ones who have to absorb those hits. Do I see anything in the chat? I see that we have a subscriber. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I'm so glad y'all like this content. What? I said I was going to pop on this mobile version a little bit more and talk to the people. I'm so glad that y'all enjoy this conversation, because these are the things I be thinking about. And I was like, let me introduce y'all more so to my thought process, not just the final product. It seems like people really like just kicking it and talking. And I love that, because I love me a good conversation. So if you feel so inclined, please do put something in the chat. Let me know how you processing this. I find this conversation fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Right? Because what's going to happen with that? They talked about, just a quick recap, they talked about the lack of strategy in that call, or better yet, that live panel discussion. They talked about the strategic actors, who's in the room, what we've been talking about, that who's in the room, who's allowed to be in the room. They talked about high levels of escalation. They talked about global impact. They talked about the deal supposed to be signed, in Europe, potentially this weekend. One place says Saturday. My question is, we talking about an MOU, but realistically hasn't been signed yet. So until it's signed, sealed, and delivered, what? Okay. Right. Sanctions. What did I say? That's pretty much like putting you in a chokehold and trying to make you tap out. They're trying to make you tap out. Oil. We know that's a big conversation when we're talking about currency. And when we talk about the US system and the weight of the US dollar, that's also in some other videos about the perception of the US dollar, right? A very strong relationship with oil. So, yeah, we're talking about the economies and how things are impacted. There's certainly going to be an impact, because also it's quite a bit that they said was hold up in the Strait of Hamas. Let's see what else they talked about. Somebody talked about the potential of moving from a memorandum of understanding to agreement, is the way I interpreted what he was saying. And he was talking about this 60 days of kind of negotiations going back and forth after this memorandum of understanding. They talked about different stakeholders, talked about, hey, if the US comes to a certain decision, can we anticipate that this will guide the actions of Israel, right? How much power, leverage, exists to maybe change, modify, or enforce certain things with regards to how they are interacting in this particular dynamic. Once again, very fascinating discussion. What else did I have? Because once again, oh yeah, what? It's a sovereign nation, right? So they don't necessarily have to take it. So they don't have to take a suggestion, right? Or follow the lead of another country, per se, their sovereign nation, right? So it's so interesting to think about what's happening in those negotiations, how all that will play out, and how it impacts what us as individuals, because that's always my question. Once again, thank you for the subscription. Thank you all who have popped in on this live. If you have questions, always feel free to drop it in the chat. If you don't catch it live, you can catch it in the replay. You can catch it when it sits on the channel, because I will allow it to be posted there. Throw a comment up there at that time. I'm always excited to come back and read any comments, questions, concerns that people may have that might guide the next live, right? Because y'all know, listen, we learning together. Because this stuff is current events. This stuff is happening to us now. So we learning this together. I feel like that song from Disney, we're all in this together. Wow. Right? We really are all in this together. So we do have to discuss these things so that we can figure out what we're going to do, so that we are all okay. Right? At the end of the day, we make sure that we are all okay and we can cope, with whatever outcomes that come, and that we are utilizing all of our resources to make sure that we have the best possible outcome collectively, right? The most ideal situation is for everyone to have a win-win. However, as constituents in general, our side, their side, and whoever else is impacted, right? How are we going to cope? How are we going to deal? How are we going to adapt with the decisions that are being made in these rooms that we aren't necessarily embodied into? So we have to look at whatever details and information we can get, use that to strategize, to plan how are we going to cope with these outcomes? How can we make sure that we are okay? So feel empowered when you can to make decisions, like when it comes to like elections and stuff. You vote people in who reflect your interest in, and will do positive things for your communities, right? Because often they are the people who are selecting those who are appointed, right? So you do have something that you can do. Always feel empowered. Don't feel like you're handicapped, like you can't do anything. You can. You just have to be informed so that when it's your time to act, engage, and do, and be responsive and be informed, right? You can do so comfortably. So I wish you well this evening, child. We starting to creep up on what my bedtime, right? Finish my little Pedialytes that y'all been watching me sip on. Hopefully you don't find that offensive that I had myself a sip of Pedialyte. It's just Pedialyte. And yeah, I'm gonna have myself a glass of water. And I'm gonna go ahead and call it a night. Once again, thank you so much for being on this live with me. I wish you well. I hope you are taking care of yourself, engaging in self-care, but also staying well informed. This is Legally Everywhere with y'all. We looking into everything And you can't tell me I didn't come in with them receipts. I told you we partake in receipt buffets. Why? Because we eating over here. Every life may not be for you, but I can assure you there's always something that you can snack on and you can peruse on over here. We are getting into what? Everything. Because we legally everywhere looking into everything. I'll catch you in the next video. See you next time.